This is our first official session of this conference. It's Understanding Designation, Funding, and Outreach Programs. Oh, thank you. We thought this would be great background to launch the rest of the session. So you're going to get some great information from our three speakers. I am Barbara Wyatt, you know my name by now. I've spent my entire 50-year career in historic preservation working on designation programs of one sort or another, from local designation to the SHPO office in Wisconsin, to finally retiring from the National Park Service, where I worked with the National Historic Landmarks Program and with the National Register of Historic Places. So I know the importance of getting important sites, first of all, found through surveys and then designated through the variety of designation programs we have, from local designation to the National Register to even international, and now I'm involved in UNESCO projects through the International Scientific Community on Cultural Landscapes, because I come at preservation largely from a cultural landscape perspective, which these rural landscapes we're going to be hearing about during this entire conference are magnificent cultural landscapes. So we're so fortunate to have speakers in this session who represent the leading preservation organizations in the country, and that is the National Park Service and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So I'm delighted to introduce them, although I can't call up their bios very well on my phone. So I'm going to have them paraphrase the please give your backgrounds. First, Lisa Davidson, and then we go to Fred Wong, and then Renee Coleman from the National Trust. So why don't you can't hear?
No, you want to give her the mic.
Pardon me?
You want to give her the mic.
Oh, well, she's going to come up here. Oh, you want to come up here?
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you so much. Lisa is going to start, and they'll each begin with their own brief introduction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara, and thank you to the 1882 Foundation and the Utah SHPO and all of the sponsors. I'm really pleased to be here today for this conversation, and I think, as Barbara suggested, this is maybe just a starting point. I'll be here, for the rest of the conference, so please catch me at any time if you have questions or just want to chat. So I am coming to you from Washington, D.C., where I serve as the National Historic Landmarks Program Manager in the Washington office. We do have National Historic Landmarks representation in all of the 7 National Park Service regional offices as well. And then in Washington, the National Historic Landmarks Program is paired with the National Register of Historic Places, kind of as a sister program. So we are all within the Cultural Resources Directorate in headquarters. I have been a career public historian. I sort of landed there after doing my PhD in American Studies at George Washington University. And have been very fortunate to work in various cultural resources programs. So I'm also happy to chat about that and kind of the various pathways into Park Service careers as well. I'm going to spend just a few minutes today going over sort of an overview of the National Historic Landmarks Program, and also a bit of information about the National Register of Historic Places, although Barbara, of course, is a wealth of information about that as well. And because I am a historian, I always like to start with a little bit of background. So if you could do the next slide, please, Amy. Thank you. So the origins of the National Historic Landmarks Program go back to 1935, when President Franklin Roosevelt signed the Historic Sites, Buildings, and Antiquities Act, authorizing a new and expanded historic preservation role for the National Park Service. And the idea was the initial survey of national historic sites was being done with the idea of identifying potential new national parks. It was very much with that park focus. But they quickly realized that there were just too many nationally significant sites to make them all ones that the National Park Service could own and manage. And that's even back then when they had a much more kind of narrow understanding of what was nationally significant. The modern era of NHL designations began in 1960, and that's when the Secretary of the Interior began to use the recommendations prepared by NPS staff and approved by the National Park System Advisory Board to formally designate properties, both public and privately owned, to recognize their national significance and encourage preservation. This whole process expanded greatly in 1966 with the passage of the National Historic Preservation Act and creating the National Register of Historic Places. So today, although the National Historic Landmarks Program and the National Register are administered together at the National Park Service and share many similarities, there are some differences between the designation and the listing processes, and I'll reference a few, but the main thing with the National Register is, of course, the list of properties can have local, state, or national level significance. And its administration is decentralized more to incorporate the state, tribal, or federal preservation offices. And I'll get a little more into the NHL process as we go, but to just give a sense of the scale of the two programs, we currently have just 2,635 NHLs compared to almost 99,000 National Register listed properties. Okay, next slide, please. So the over 2,600 currently designated NHLs are found throughout the United States, its territories, and in the U.S. affiliated Pacific Island nations. And each of these properties was determined to possess exceptional value in a wide variety of themes and topics illustrating the history of the United States. NHLs are designated by the Secretary of the Interior after review and approval by the NHL Committee of the National Park System Advisory Board, and then the full National Park System Advisory Board. Buildings, structures, objects, sites, or districts can be designated as NHLs, similar to National Register. But there has to be a tangible place to qualify. NHLs are not necessarily owned or managed by the federal government. In fact, the great majority are privately owned, with fewer than 400 of the 2,600 and some owned by federal agencies. And I'm sure you've probably noticed that I'm showing a few images of some of the 14 NHLs in Utah as the backgrounds of my slides. You can go ahead to the next one, Amy. So what does NHL designation do and not do for a property? You see here the list of benefits includes receiving a bronze plaque, access to technical assistance from the National Park Service on preservation questions, and sometimes preferred access to grant programs and other funding. For example, the Save America's Treasures program administered by the National Park Service gives extra consideration to NHLs when evaluating applications. And that's sort of more of a bricks and mortar project kind of grant. NHLs also receive extra consideration and consultation over adverse effects of federally funded projects under sections 106 and 110F of the National Historic Preservation Act. However, unfortunately, NHL designation does not come with automatic funding or protections against neglect, alteration, or demolition in some cases. Next slide, please. The NHL program provides a variety of guidance to the public for assistance with writing NHL nominations. The main how-to guide is our new NHL bulletin. That's the first update we've done since 1999. That's the publication that we have in the back there with the kind of blue cover. You're welcome to take one. And we also have them available as a PDF online. The main goal of the revised bulletin was to support continued growth and diversity in NHL designations with detailed advice on best practices and technical requirements. One of the ways it does this is with an updated explanation of the qualitative framework. As specified in the formal NHL program regulations from 1983, the qualitative framework involves the three conditions that must be met for a property to achieve NHL designation: national significance under one of the 6 NHL criteria, a high degree of integrity, and then the third, which is most unique to the NHL program, is a comparative analysis, demonstrating that the nominated property is among the best to convey its particular significance. So it's the way these three conditions relate to each other that varies and is distinct for each NHL eligible property. And one of the things we wanted to do with really re-emphasizing the qualitative framework is to signal that there is room within the select group of properties as NHLs for all types of stories and resources. You just need to be able to make that case in terms of the three aspects. Next slide, please. The other guidance documents that are key to the NHL program are theme studies, and thank you for Ted for the excellent shout out for NHL theme studies. They're called that because they originated from the very early survey days when the program was creating lists of historic sites related to big traditional themes such as the military, politics, or commerce. The topics chosen for theme studies have very much evolved over the decades to reflect current scholarly interest and expanded representation in the NHL program. And here you see the covers of some of our most recent ones. We could just do one click. So there, of course, we have some hard copies as well. Is our AAPI theme study. It's a wonderful publication, also available as a PDF if you want to access that format online. This is an excellent example of how the theme studies today are really scholarly documents that include contextual analysis of a major topic, guidance on evaluating properties related to that topic under NHL criteria, and then also study lists of possible landmarks recommended for further study. And that was really how we arrived on one of our recent initiatives is the NHL nomination for the Summit Camp in California was identified in the AAPI theme study. And of course, you're going to hear a lot more about that exciting property in the next session. So one of the ideas with the theme study is, it's hard to sort of think about some of these topics in that holistic national way. So they provide a head start if you're going to be working on a nomination. You still have to go ahead and prepare that nomination for an individual property, but if it's part of a theme study, that context, that comparative analysis is sort of already gotten underway for you. Let's see, go ahead to the next slide, please. So just another word about the NHL designation process, because I know there's a lot of interest in where Summit Camp is along the way here. It has currently been reviewed and approved by the National Historic Landmarks Committee, which honestly is the one of the most rigorous parts of the process. The committee of subject matter experts reads very carefully, asks a lot of questions, and we're waiting for it to be scheduled for the next review by the next National Park System Advisory Board, which hopefully will take place in December of this year. There's another group of nominations. There's another group of nominations that's a little further along in the process. They were reviewed by the advisory board earlier in May, and they're making their way to the secretary's desk. And we're excited to say that we're hearing that she's probably going to be signing that group as early as next week. And that's a group of 5 new nominations, 9 updated ones, and then sadly 2 withdrawals for properties that were demolished. So. We try to. It's a slow process. It takes many years, but we try very much to support every step of the way, both the NHL staff at the Washington office and in the regional offices. Next slide, please. My colleagues in the National Register program also have an extensive collection of guidance documents that can help property owners or consultants prepare nominations, and these are all available digitally on the program website. Our newest document is a quarterly publication called Best Practices Review that highlights the latest approaches and current examples on various topics related to the National Register. And the June edition is going to be coming out in a couple weeks, and it's going to be a guest appearance by the NHL program discussing updated nominations for already designated NHLs. And then, of course, we have our bulletin series, which are the basic how-to documents on a lot of different aspects of National Register documentation. And then another thing that's forthcoming pretty soon from our National Register friends are the update to the Traditional Cultural Places bulletin, how to prepare NHL nominations for traditional cultural places. They hope to release that later this year. Next slide, please. So here you see a list of the benefits and limitations of National Register listing. Like NHLs, the main benefits are honorary and educational, while there may be some financial incentives or preservation protection that can be accessed. And I'll note I'm showing an image here from one of our most recent listings related to Chinese American history, close to where I live in Maryland. The Chinatown Historic District in Baltimore was just listed this March as part of a multiple property study of Asian American communities in Maryland. Next slide, please. So that Maryland study was one of several related to AAPI history supported by our underrepresented communities grants that are available from the National Park Service. Others that have recently been completed are studies of Asian Americans in Los Angeles, 1850 to 1950, Chinese immigrants and Chinese Americans in the city of Boston, and Asian American and Pacific Islanders in California, 1850 to 1970. And there's a half a dozen other similar projects that are currently underway. So this grant has really been intended to increase representation in the National Register for providing funding to actually prepare these nominations. It's been hugely successful, but there's still very much work to be done to make our federal designation programs more representative of all Americans. And the grants programs are administered by our state, local, tribal plans and grants division colleagues. And all the details are available on their website. I also have some handouts. And I'd also invite you to please explore the NHL program and National Register websites, where you can download a lot of the documents that I've mentioned. And as I said, I'm also happy to answer questions as we go along. So with that, I will turn it over to the next person. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, I feel like I neglected you, Fred. So in my introduction, so I just wanted to mention that it is an honor to have somebody from a federal agency here that's one of the top 3 landholding agencies in the country, right? And certainly there's, on all of the land that the Forest Service has stewardship over, there are many, many sites of interest to this group. So thank you so much for coming, and I think that everyone's going to be very interested in hearing what you have to say about the APA initiative as well. So that is, well, I won't even try to explain it, so you do that. But I apologize for not being a little bit more verbose about you before. But thank you, Fred.
Thank you, and I just wanted to give a brief introduction. My name is Fred Wong. I work for the USDA Forest Service in the Inyo National Forest in California, and I was born and raised. I'm second generation Chinese American, born and raised in Southern California, and I've been working for the federal government for the last 20 plus years. Half of my career was with the Bureau of Land Management, and the other half with the Forest Service, and I'm glad I'm in a company of historians because I'm an amateur historian myself. And so I like to give a little context too. And so just to begin, I do want to tell you a little bit about the Forest Service. The Forest Service is one of the federal land managing agencies. The Forest Service manages about 8% of the land in the United States, but primarily in the West. For example, in California, Forest Service manages 20% of the land. And so our mission is a multiple use mission, which means, simply put, is we allow companies to extract natural resources from public lands, but we want to require them to do it in a sustainable way to ensure that they don't significantly harm natural resources like wildlife habitat, water resources, or even cultural resources. And so I really enjoy working for the Forest Service because it's really a conservation-oriented organization, and conservation can be really defined as proper use of nature, where you contrast that with the preservation mission of the Park Service, which is more about protecting nature from use. And so the reason why I like working for the Forest Service is because it's real. It's the reality is we need as a society now to utilize natural resources to sustain our society, kind of like what the contributions of the Chinese immigrants did. They provide products and services to America. And so, for example, timber or grazing or mining. I'll give you an example. The wood that is used in your homes, it might have come from Forest Service land, or the copper wiring from your home probably came from mining on Forest Service land, and the steak that maybe you'll eat later this week, maybe it may have came from Forest Service cattle grazing on Forest Service land. But the main thing is it's very challenging to balance as a multiple use conservation agency. Very challenging to balance the use versus the protection of the natural and cultural resources, and so. That's why I like working for the Forest Service. Another thing I like working for the Forest Service is because we get to live in beautiful areas. I'm along the Eastern Sierras, And the geology is basically on the west side. It gradually increases and then finally just drops off. Really staggering granite mountains, snow-covered mountains, and alpine blue lakes. And so I really like working there. And one of the thing is recreation is one of our more popular outreach. To engage. The Forest Service tries to engage the American public because it is their public lands. But whenever I go hiking, I don't see very many Asian Americans hiking around, and so recreation is probably not one of the strong suits that are attracted for Asian Americans. And so, get some water here. And so one of the other ideas is how do we engage underserved communities like the Asian Pacific American communities? And so cultural tourism is one of the ideas we came up with. And so 10 years ago, I got my first district ranger job, which is basically another way of saying a manager of a subunit of the forest. 10 years ago in the Stanislaus National Forest, which is on the west side of the Sierras. And there I met John Cusano, who at the time worked for the Forest Service in the DC office, but now is retired and now works for the 1882 Foundation. And we were talking. We both belong to an Asian Pacific American Employees Association on the Forest Service, which is a network of Asian American employees helping each other out. And so, he once said, "Fred, I want to tell you a story. A few years back, in the Pacific Northwest, the Forest Service had these heritage tours in Washington and in Oregon. And you know what? You should do that here in California as well, because number one, California was the beginning of the gold rush, and there's a lot of Chinese immigrants and contributions during that time. And number two, you're in a leadership position now, and so you have a connection to the regional office of getting funding for such programs like this." And he was very convincing, and I thought, he was puffing me up a little bit. Oh yeah, he's right. I should lead something like that. And so, but I wanted to start in earnest. And so I told him, well, let's start in baby steps. Let's find out what kind of resources we have in California first, and maybe create a website, and then we could talk about tours after that. And so, I remember early on we had every year we have a district ranger manager meeting in Sacramento, and the regional forester was going to be there. And at the time, it was Randy Moore, who's now the chief of the Forest Service. And I thought, okay, that's a perfect opportunity to ask for money between sessions. And so I learned the secret: talk to their executive assistant, try to get 15 minutes of their time in a room with 2 chairs, and I'll have a shot at it. And so that's what I did. And I had this whole speech prepared, 15-minute speech prepared on why I needed interns, Asian American interns, to help us travel around California to look for this information. And he was very supportive. 5 minutes into my speech, he already stopped me and said, "Fred, that's a fantastic idea. Talk to the budget officer. She'll get you the money that you need to do this project." And so we had really strong support from our top leadership in California. And I was really happy to hear that. And so we were able to get the interns to travel around and talk to the heritage program managers to find out what sort of sites that they had. And then also, later I was successful at getting money for the website itself. And that's when we started introducing the Chinese Historical Society of America, who helped us build the website. And then, unfortunately, I had to leave the Forest Service, but I went over to the Bureau of Land Management. But I was able to hand over the reins to Hilda Kwan, another Forest Service employee who took over for me for the Forest Service. And on the BLM side, I was able to bring in the BLM into the picture at their sites, provide some money. And so we actually got some money to produce a film as well. It's called Tracing History, and it's going to be released next month on the agency websites. But it's a story about a mother and daughter descendants of railroad workers visiting some of the sites that their ancestors may have worked in. And it's less of a documentary and more of a kind of an emotional connection. So it's really unique and different. But we'll send out information. And 1882 helped sponsor that as well, and so we'll have more information on that later. But even now, turning back to the Forest Service, there's really strong support for that. 1882 Foundation finally was able to lead a tour, develop some tours over at 1882 or at the Summit Camp, which are ongoing. And currently, our regional forester Jen Everline is very supportive of this as well. She provided funding for the next 5 years, and so the plan is to develop more tours on the western side of the Sierras. And so what I wanted to do was focus on a tour near the Stanislaus National Forest, my old forest, because those areas are really the areas where a lot of other contributions that the Chinese immigrants, the Chinese pioneers have done that is outside of the railroad, because there's so many other things that the Chinese immigrants helped out with. And for example, rock corrals, water ditches, water flumes, and there was even a battle between the Tongs in that area as well. And there's a winery cave that I'm trying to get permission to get on private land to check out as well, because it's very interesting. And so we're trying to do that as well with the additional funding. Hopefully it'll be implemented in 2025. And then also we came up with an idea of producing a children's book to try to engage the young Chinese Americans, just to show their history and their place in the building of the American West. And I'm hopeful that will help them with people always kind of implying that they're the perpetual foreigners, and hopefully that will help kids understand that no, they've been here for generations to help build America. And so Sue Lee, I remember, also had an idea of a comic book, which I really like, that maybe we can give out for free during outreach events. And so we have a lot of plans, and we're always open for new ideas on what to do. But the one thing I wanted to kind of emphasize in conclusion is really funding-wise from the Forest Service, and actually from the BLM side too, it really is a grassroots efforts from the Asian American employees in our agencies. And so, we don't have a formal program for this. And so we don't have an employee dedicated to do these projects, these side projects. It's really collateral duties. I manage a district on the Inyo National Forest most of the time, and Hilda Kwan is the planner for the Mendocino National Forest. And we just kind of do this as a passion of ours because we really enjoy working on these projects. It energizes us. And when you work for the Forest Service, we work in really rural areas, and we're surrounded by white folks, which is fine. However, coming to these conferences is really energizing because talking to people that look like you really is comforting. It reminds me of a family banquet, and all seeing my uncles and aunties and cousins here. And so I want to really thank 1882 Foundation to really inviting the Forest Service in this event. And so we're really proud to be here and participate in this. So thank you.
Sorry. So my name is Renee Coolin, as they said. I work for the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and I have been proud to work there for 26 years, so I don't really remember any previous career. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about the way that the National Trust has been partnering through advocacy, funding, and education. So I'm hopeful that this will be useful to you. For those of you who aren't familiar with the National Trust, it's a national nonprofit founded in 1949 chartered by Congress. And it's important to tell the stories of all Americans. That was why it was chartered. In addition to receiving grants, we're also a grant-making institution ourselves. We manage 28 historic sites, and we also advocate for historic sites, both through legal advocacy and grassroots advocacy. So the first part I want to talk about is sort of an overview of funding opportunities at the National Trust. We've been providing grants for over 50 years, and in 2023 we were lucky enough to award $13 million in grants. We fund all types of preservation activities from planning, education, capacity building, to even bricks and mortar repair. Our grants range in size from $2,500 to $250,000. And so we cover a variety of preservation activities. This is a little bit about our largest program in terms of scope. It is called the Preservation Funds Program. It is an amalgam of 57 individually endowed funds, and most of them are geographically restricted, which is indicated by this particular image that you see. You can see where we have those endowed funds. So unfortunately, we do not have endowed funds for every state, but we do have some that are national. Those are very competitive. And we have some states, which is terribly frustrating, we're not getting people to apply for this funding. So I know I've talked to people here from Arkansas, if anybody's in eastern Massachusetts, Delaware, Louisiana. We have some states where we have funding but no one is applying. And the other types of funds that have been endowed are particular to a specific interest of the person who endowed it. So for example, battlefields, recent past, Rosenwald schools. These funds, as I said, are for preservation planning, education, and outreach. They are between $2,500 and $10,000. We have 3 deadlines that come up annually, so it's very quick. If you miss one, you can catch another one. February 1, June 1, and October 1. So those are also able to be applied for out of round if you have an emergency, if you have something that's coming up that you need immediate funding, the grants team will take that into consideration. And through this, we've been able to fund about 200 projects each year. We were pleased to be able to provide a small grant right when Ted and Barbara and others were starting to conceive this conference that we're at today. These grants are open to nonprofit organizations as well as local state agencies. It requires a dollar-for-dollar match, but we pay the grant up front. So if you're awarded the grant, you get the money immediately. And then you have 1 year to complete the project. These grants team staff are really eager to work with people and want to be as accommodating as they possibly can. So if you need an additional year to do that, that's fine with us. For example, this is a recent grant that we gave to the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation. It was contributing $5,000 to build a traveling exhibit to reflect the maritime heritage of the Filipino community in Washington State. And of course, few sites remain extant that honor this community's deep relationship to the maritime history. And so they're going to create a traveling exhibit as well as an online exhibit with the Philippine American National Heritage Society. I'm not sure, how many people here have ever applied for one of these funds? Anybody? Thank you. A couple. We did our guidelines in 2020 during the pandemic to make it easier, more simple for people to apply. And so it's a little different now, and you might want to be able to note these changes. So staff time is now an eligible expense for our nonprofit applicants. We do allow for organizational capacity building. So if you have board development that you want to do with your nonprofit, hiring a fundraising consultant, or doing strategic planning, those are now activities that we help fund. We don't reimburse previous funds that have already been expended, but we are funding future expenses. And probably the biggest shift is allowing the in-kind donations of goods and services as a match. So this is an example of a grant that we were able to make to China Alley Preservation Society in Hanford. It was through a program that we were able to get because of the one-time grant funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities. So that was exciting to be able to have that pot of money to be able to award. Folks are often interested in how we select our grantees, and it's fairly universal across the programs in terms of the way that most organizations would evaluate an organization's capacity, the feasibility of the project, the budget, the timeline. But we also consider the historic resource that's being preserved, the significance of that resource to its own community, and its ability to tell stories, which of course one of our goals is to tell the full history of the United States. So this is an example of a 2020 grant that was done through the Southwest Intervention Fund. And why we wanted to highlight this one is it was funding for a new roof on a trading post which had been vacant since 1921. They got the grant. They were 95% of the way through putting on the new roof when a major windstorm happened in April 2022. So they applied for and received an emergency intervention fund, an emergency grant of $8,000 to be able to fix the roof after the rainstorm, and now it's airtight and hopefully will allow for further preservation of that. These are some of the other grant funds that we have available. And this is a picture from the Bears Ear Partnership. Since 2014, we've been working with that organization to help protect the lands between, which is 500,000 acres of public lands connecting Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, and Bears Ears from oil and gas development. And so we awarded a grant to them to help build their partnership, as well as support the tribal leaders in advocating for permanent protection of their land. These are the other grant funds that you might want to apply for. Two in particular I want to call out is the Heart Fund for Small Towns. That has been a really underutilized program, so if folks from small towns want to apply, that's a really good option. And also we have a leadership grant named in honor of a former boss of mine, Peter Brink, so that if you wanted to do mentoring with another organization or another peer, it gives you the opportunity to either go there and learn from them or to bring them to you. So I think it's a really great program. I added this slide in here after talking to a woman about her background in Mississippi and all of the settlements that took place along the Delta. We have a very active African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, and it funds anywhere between $50,000 to $250,000 in 4 categories: capacity building, preservation planning, programming, and interpretation. And I thought, even though this is a highly competitive program, that there might be instances where the African American history overlapped with the Chinese American history, and that would be of interest to the National Trust because you would be interpreting both communities. I'm running out of steam here. Okay. The Backing Small Historic Restaurants Grant Program just increased this year. The past couple of years, through a partnership with American Express, we've been able to highlight and work with 25 restaurants around the country. This year, we're able to double that, so now we're going to be working with 50 restaurants this year. I don't know how many people saw this live on Good Morning America. I did not see the live action reveal, but it was very exciting to be able to present $25,000 to the Peking Noodle in Butte. I did want to highlight something for the nonprofits in the room. If your restaurant in your community is selected, they have the option of providing $10,000 to the nonprofit to help them manage the grant and help them manage the work. So, for example, in New Orleans, we worked with a restaurant who wanted to work with a local preservation organization, and they partnered and gave $10,000 of their dollars. National Fund for Sacred Places is also another grant that we're doing in partnership with Partners for Sacred Places. And this is another opportunity that is specifically focused on congregations, active congregations. They have a standalone web page, which of course, if you go to the National Trust web page, it'll take you there. But this is a great opportunity for those if you're working with active congregations. This is an example from Honolulu, where we helped a Shin Buddhist temple. It was the main one that served 30 smaller temples. So we provided them funding to help repair their building. So if you have any questions about grant funding, I can definitely put you in charge. Might give you some preliminary information and point you in the right direction. But we have a very active grants team at the National Trust who can answer any and all questions. I wanted to talk a little bit about advocacy and outreach, some of the other programs that we have where we are partnering with different folks. How many people here are familiar with America's 11 Most Endangered Historic Places? It's one of our most popular programs. I had the honor this year of going to Tams, West Virginia, to make the announcement because I am A, from West Virginia, and B, daughter of two coal miners, granddaughter of two coal miners. So it was personally impactful, but I have to tell you that I didn't realize the reach of this program and the intense effort that goes into this marketing program. But it's a great way to uplift efforts that are already happening in a community. And so in 2023, we listed both the Seattle Chinatown International District as well as Philadelphia's Chinatown. Again, from that encroaching development that has been going on. My favorite is the National Preservation Awards. It's sort of like if one is a carrot, one is a stick, this is the carrot side, to honor the hard work of people for many, many years. It's very emotional. I don't know if anybody's been able to see it live. You can go on, watch these YouTube videos. You can still cry in the privacy of your own home, but they're very emotional. They recognize the best of the best. There are 7 categories, including an Emerging Leaders Award. And why I put Rosalind up here is because we continue the partnership, whether it's through a grant or through any other trust programs. It's like we never stop collaborating in different ways. And so my colleague Dean Gao just worked with Rosalind on a roundtable in Chinatowns in Los Angeles. So quite excited. I'm also putting this up here because of the China Alley story. When the China Alley had a fire that was set at the base of their stairs, and the dramatic before and after. And their commitment was amazing because they had just done the training with the firefighters to explain what to say first. So the award was not only for their longstanding stewardship of this site, but also that they had the forethought to have the firefighters in literally, I think it was a few weeks or a few months before, to say these are the things that we would want to have saved. Past Forward is coming, whether we are ready for it or not. Registration is going to go live in a couple of weeks. It's going to be in New Orleans this year, and I want to thank the folks who worked with us last year, including Ted, Jeffrey, who is here, and Asian American Pacific Islanders Historic Preservation, because We had a conference in Washington, D.C. this past year, and it was really terrific. This year, it's going to be the kickoff of a year-long celebration of our 75th anniversary, which I think will be fun, and who doesn't love New Orleans? One thing that I've heard in the conversations that I've had are cemeteries. I am personally passionate about the preservation of cemeteries. That is, you're talking about your kids getting involved in preservation. I always drive off the road to take my kids through cemeteries just so we can see who is buried there. We partnered with the National Park Service and CPTT to do a webinar series on preservation training. That's still online, but we also do frequently webinars on specific topics like cemeteries. Another personal passion of mine, this is kind of an odd one, are state historic tax credits. And I bring up this because one, it's something that I work on day in, day out, but also to point out that I was just walking the halls of Congress a couple of days ago and learned that 2025 is going to be the Super Bowl, they said, of tax reform. Now, who knew that 2025 was going to be so exciting in tax, and B, that they call it a Super Bowl, but it is when the federal historic tax credit, we're aiming to try and get these long-held desired improvements, including taking it from 20% to 30%, which would mean more if you're in a smaller project in a smaller community. So that could be really, if we win the Super Bowl, it could be really exciting for small communities. There's also a trend in state historic tax credits to focus the state's dollars in rural communities. So for example, in Colorado, they give you more percentage of your tax credit if you are doing a project in a smaller community. They just did something similar like that in Kansas and Louisiana. So this is a trend that we're seeing for rural folks who actually control their state legislatures are saying, we need more money in our smaller communities. This is the contact information if you would like to speak to me, the grants team, my colleague Dee Gao. We're very excited and honored to be here, and thank you for your time.